Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about the state of BfA healers and answering really the age-old question, how do you rank the healers in BfA, right? So, this quick and dirty answer to that, though, is that you really can't, or at least I prefer not to, because I don't think it gives an accurate description of what's going on with the healers and why they're in the position that they're in, right? So I want to be able to go over that. Starting off in this video because they released the old year LFR, the first wing of that is available. So I went through it on all my healers, looked at not only their HPS, but what they're bringing to the table, the age-old utility that's coming out for them. So I wanted to be able to kind of take everything into account, specifically in a raid environment, to be able to kind of see what the healers are at, where they really stand, right? So going into it, one of the big things I always hear about from my stream, link in the description below, is, oh my god, how good is Mistweaver? Or like all kinds of Mistweaver questions, and a lot of it stems from how well you see them doing in raid testing, right? You'll see the heroic and mythic raid testing where usually I play my priest because that's my main. And you'll see people playing Mistweaver and just absolutely dunking on everybody. You see, paladins and shamans in many cases struggled a lot during many of the heroic and mythic raid testing because their classes just were not putting out the healing that all the other ones were. And the big thing to that one is it started hyping up a lot in the way of Mistweaver. And in many ways, that's really not, the best picture. It's not the most accurate picture because tuning is just always this fluid environment that we're seeing throughout the beta process. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to cover is this stuff is not set in stone and it can build on each other, build on itself. So what do we have to look at? We have to look at their general toolkits and the assumption that healing is going to be more or less balanced, like it has the raw healing throughput. Again, raw healing throughput will be more or less balanced like it has been about the last 2 expansions or so, right? With give or take some very large oddities. So starting it off with Mistweaver, everybody's saying, oh, Mistweaver is this incredible thing. And while it does have exceptional single target healing, it does have a lot that it can bring to the table. One of the biggest things that is kind of scary to me that is their overall utility is very lacking. So while their single target healing is great in a expansion that looks like it's shaping up where tanks are going to be requiring even more single target healing, we've seen this a little bit in the past in the beginning of Warlords of Draenor during like the High Mall and Blackheart Foundry raids where tanks really relied on healers a lot. And the response from the Mythic raiding community was, let's have 2 Holy Paladins in our raid group. So that's what you saw a lot of times in Blackheart Foundry was double Holy Paladins going into it because they wanted to make sure they were able to keep the tanks alive and having healers that can allocate that single target healing. If that continues, could it be an option that you're seeing something like Paladin and Mistweaver used in conjunction with each other? Maybe, right? But that has to be something that they're really going to be leaning on because outside of exceptional single target healing, they're not crazy great. Their utility is extremely lacking, and that's one of the biggest concerning things. Is they have they're on the low tier for external cooldowns in Life Cocoon, and their raid cooldown is just about average at best, right? The big thing when you're going into a new expansion is that all the damage slows down. Everybody else slows down. So having this really snap raid cooldown and revival, it's not bad, but it's not something that you're going to be opting to take over another cooldown because you need this instant effect. A lot of the damage is going to be more steady. You're going to have more time to react to it, and you're going to be relying on your healers to kind of work on attrition healing more than anything else to be able to get everybody else topped off. So in that way, their utility isn't crazy remarkable. Getting things like leg sweep baseline or being able to have leg sweep and ring a piece, those things can be pretty good. But overall, they're interchangeable with a lot of crowd controls that other melee bring to the table already. So as long as you already have those melee, then you're kind of fine. Other aspect of it is the physical damage debuff that Monk can deal. And again, if you already have another DPS Monk, then you're covered there. So I think the big thing is a lack of unique enough utility for them that is quite scary for me. And I think that's one of the big areas that I think has been kind of maybe overlooked by a lot of people hyping up Mistweaver right now. With Paladin and Shaman, like I mentioned, there's a lot of talk about how low their throughput is, but their utility is more or less intact. Beacon of Light, Beacon of Faith is still extremely powerful and will continue to be so, like I mentioned, because once their healing gets buffed up, well, Beacon gets buffed up as well. And whenever that's going to become more effective, especially early in an expansion, when they're making tanks more reliant on their healers, then you just have a recipe for Paladin being in just that niche spot that they've always been in. They've always been in this spot where, oh, okay, well, we're able to bring the Paladin where we want to bring the Paladin every time. Aura of Sacrifice has been changed from, this mega raid cooldown that does better the lower everybody is, to kind of like a redirect where it becomes a better form of Aura of Sacrifice, but it also has a threat of you dying. So in that vein, it is a little bit more risky, but extra damage reduction for the group is great utility to bring to the table, and not missing out on still having an immunity, having Blessing Protection, and still having a solid to good level external cooldown and Blessing of Sacrifice, or sorry, Hand of Sacrifice. They're still in an excellent position. Shaman at the very same position where you're saying, hey, they have Spirit Link. Who else brings something like Spirit Link? Getting everybody's health at an equal level whenever huge damage is going off. And there's a number of different fights. Some of them you may see on your screen here where Spirit Link's amazing, and that's going to continue to be so until the end of Raider time, right? Because their setups, the toolkits of Paladin and Shaman are so powerful, even if their healing wasn't fantastic and you had some healers that were just raw HPS healers and some that just brought utility, they'd still be brought because that stuff is unique and it's just irreplaceable in so many ways. So even though you're not seeing like a lot of healing out of them, or you're not seeing some flashy performance out of them, they're still going to be slated to be brought all the time. And we have been seeing some of the buffs. We saw considerable buffs, for example, for Shaman, where they were getting like 15% buffs across the board to kind of bring them back up to speed there. Now, going into priests, we've seen Disc maintaining a lot of the utility that they have. Along the lines of getting barrier and pain suppression just still at their same levels, still at a very powerful position. But also we've seen the atonement kind of change and kind of grow, where you're saying, or even absorbs as well. No CD unpowered shield. Rapture increases the power of your shield by a considerable amount, making it able for you to cover about half your raid in the mythic environment entirely with big shields that'll soak up a huge chunk of the damage and keep people in a much more protected position. Talent changes like Luminous Barrier make it so that you're able to, absorb big damage hits even if everybody's not stacked up. And you have a lot of options in the raid environment. So Disc in many ways hasn't really lost anything. And Holy, which is much maligned for not really having much utility, is getting Symbol of Hope baseline. And going into a new expansion where you don't have to sacrifice your own healing to give utility to everybody else, like you used to in Legion when Symbol of Hope was first introduced, is just an amazing feat. You're able to say, hey, I don't actually have to hurt myself to be able to contribute more to the raid. And early on in expansions, let me tell you, everybody is used to spamming as hard as possible, which means everybody's going to be Having some kind of utility like that where you're saying, I'm going to be able to regen everybody a bunch of mana, is invaluable in progression, especially when you start getting later into the bosses and you start having the 8 to 10 minute fights at the first tier of an expansion, and healers just don't know how to deal with it. It's a very great tool to be able to bring to the table, and it is also kind of a step up for Holy Priest. So that's the great position to be in. Rested Druid, to wrap this up, has lost out on, for example, the Moving Tranquility, which kind of sucks, but they're really the only healer that has such high mobility and such high consistent mobility to be able to get all the way across the room, continue casting, continue getting huge value, and in many ways their talents have kind of also reflected that. Even if you do have to stand still, of course, for Tranquility, you're now able to extend the duration of Tranquility because it's a hot via Flourish. So you have amazing synergy between 2-minute Tranquility and Flourish. You're able to maintain healing for large periods of time and kind of stretching out your mana in that way. So, and of course, you have one of the best external cooldowns in Ironbark, where it has such high uptime that it's always available for you. So you have many different tools that are there, even when you lose out on a little bit. So at this point, what I really think that you're looking at in BfA is kind of a continuation of what we've seen in the past. Paladin and Shaman brought back in almost every raid group. And then you're probably going to be looking at something like Disc Priest being much more common, as some of the changes made it a little bit more easy to get into, a little bit more easy to kind of understand and play with. And then you're kind of having that 4th slot. The 4th slot opening up between, in my mind, really Holy Priest and Rested Druid. Because Monk, unfortunately, is just lacking a little bit in that extra utility, in that non-healing effect. And in order to kind of guarantee its slot into that kind of 4th healer area, you would have to have some kind of scenario where tanks just need so much single target healing that they're just leaning on, a Paladin and a Mistweaver or something like that to dump the healing into them. And that's something that I don't really see happening, right? And so my healer ranking, if you will, for BfA is really more of just a selection of the haves and the have-nots. You know, when we're expecting that a good player is, and a good player Jimmy and good player Bobby are going to be able to do about the same amount of healing in different classes, in most different classes, well, then you're saying, well, what else do you bring to the table here? And while it's not going to matter, and this is the most important part, while it's not going to matter for most, like 90%, 95% of raid guilds out there, a lot of impression trickles down. You'll see what the top guilds are running with, and everybody wants to copy them, right? And that's one of the things that is kind of most scary going into it, is that everyone's going to get this impression that you have to run Paladin, Shaman, whatever, even if you're in normal and heroic or something, which is obviously not the case. So in many ways, the healer ranking is, like I said, haves and have-nots and utility, but it's also in the highest level possible, where you need every little inch and every little scrap of utility that can be brought to the table, right? You're still going to find in many situations that the best player should play, and the best healers, as long as you're having a diversity of healers, you want to bring in the best players in the healing slots, right? But this expansion has highlighted something that's happened in many other expansions in the past, where utility really does stand out as king, and in many ways it's kind of a disappointment in many ways. So next video, I'm going to be going over, of course, the state of Mythic Plus. And I think it's a little bit easier to give an approximate M plus ranking for all the healers, because you're only going to be able to bring one, right? So stay tuned for that. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know what you guys think about, at least my quick analysis for where the healers stand, and what you think they're going to be, the kind of compositions going forward into BfA. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll catch you all tomorrow.